Psalm 26. We'll read through the entire psalm together. It's not a particularly long psalm. And then we'll think through its structure and what it's saying to us. We'll see if we get through it all this evening. Probably will, but we'll see how it goes. All right, Psalm 26. That's not too small. The Psalm of David. Judge me, O Lord, for I have walked in mine integrity. I have trusted also in the Lord, therefore I shall not slide. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins and my heart, for thy loving kindness is before mine eyes, and I have walked in thy truth. I have not sat with vain persons, neither will I go in with dissemblers. I have hated the congregation of evildoers, and will not sit with the wicked. I will wash mine hands in innocency, so will I compass thine altars, O Lord, that I may publish with the voice of thanksgiving and tell of all thy wondrous works. Lord, I have loved the habitation of thy house and the place wherein thine honor dwelleth. Gather not my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloody men, in whose hand is mischief, and their right hand is full of bribes. But as for me, I will walk in mine integrity. Redeem me, and be merciful unto me. My foot standeth in an even place in the congregation. Will I bless the Lord? So we have this psalm, and recall, as we have talked in the past about the nature of Hebrew poetry and the various structures of Hebrew poetry, we start to think through the structure of this particular psalm. And of course, this is not an exact science. Poetry never is an exact science, regardless of the language that it's in. But throughout this one, I kind of went back and forth about the various aspects of structure and how this might be. And what I came to is this general kind of a structure for the entirety of the psalm. I believe verses 1 through 3 are a confident request that's rooted in David's integrity and God's character. And then I think verses 4 through 7 are an exposition of David's integrity. And then verses 8 through 12 are an exposition of God's character. And it's a little bit of a strained exposition of God's character in a sense. David is still talking about the various things that he expects because of who he is, but that's exactly it. The things that he expects from God because of who he is, because of his integrity. And so I do believe that we see that reflection there, and we'll walk through it together. And of course, you can let me know if you think that that's, if that makes sense, or if you would have structured it yourself another way. We'll begin with verses 1 through 3, thinking through what is typically in a psalm, the introduction at the beginning, maybe an introduction of sorts, maybe setting a theme, or maybe just jumping right into the first stanza of the psalm itself. And this particular one takes a structure. Remember, when we're thinking about poetry, this would be what we'd call a modified chiastic structure. Let me see if I have. I switched to our normal computer here because I wanted to use both screens a little bit more efficiently, but now I can't pull up other things, so maybe this won't be the best of ideas, and I don't know that I have any more of those Hebrew poetry handouts. But recall, we have 5 different ways that Hebrew poetry relates itself. Hebrew poetry does not rhyme in sound, it rhymes in thought. It rhymes structure, but primarily in thought. So we're looking for rhymes of thought. And so you have the various different types that we've talked about in the past. And the final one is what we call chiastic structure. And it would look like something like this, A, B, C, and then usually it would go B, A. But in this one, we have what I see here is an A, B, C, A, B. And maybe that means that that was not David's intent in writing to have this structure. But I do see something here that I think is pretty interesting. And we'll look through that as we get a little bit further in the psalm. So we have here a psalm of David, and do recall, as we talked about last time in your Bibles, that phrase, a psalm of David, is a part of the inspired element of the text. If you have other headings in your Bible, they'll be in a different font, and they're in a different font in order to distinguish that they are not in the Hebrew, but you'll notice that a Psalm of David, and sometimes it'll say a Psalm of David on an instrument or higgaion or whatever it might be. All of those things you'll notice will be in the same font, and that's because it is actually a part of the Hebrew text. And so a Psalm of David is a part of the Hebrew text here. Judge me, O Lord, for I have walked in mine integrity. I have trusted also in the Lord, therefore I shall not slide. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins and my heart, for thy loving kindness is before mine eyes, and I have walked in thy truth. We'll begin by walking through some of these words together so that we can understand exactly what it is that David is saying to the Lord in this prayer. He says, judge me, and that word there, to pronounce sentence, either to vindicate or to punish. It's a very common word, 182 times in our Old Testament. He's asking God to examine him and to treat him in consistency with that examination. Judge me, O Lord, pronounce sentence upon me, and then he says, for I have walked in mine integrity. So we can already see a true confidence within this psalm. David is stepping into whatever condition he's stepping into, and we'll see that the focal point of these three verses, if my structure is correct, the focal point is going to be right here. Therefore, I shall not slide. And that is going to be kind of the idea that what David is doing is he is reflecting confidence in God's character and in his integrity by which he will not slide. And we'll talk about what it means here. We'll think through that. So he says, judge. Now there have been various times, particularly when we're singing a song where I think I did it this Sunday perhaps as well, when we sang, maybe not. There's none that necessarily have that. Oh yeah, I guess it was Sunday evening, 366. Have thine own way, Lord. That's a prayer, right? And I'll sometimes say, let's make sure that the words of our lips are in fact the reflection of our heart. Do we actually want him to have his own way? And we might say the same thing. Be careful asking God to teach you patience, right? That can be a vulnerable prayer to pray, because if God is going to teach you patience, there's generally a singular way that God is going to teach you patience. Namely, he's going to try your patience, right? And so those prayers can be somewhat vulnerable or somewhat dangerous in a sense to pray. Well, here we see a truly dramatic degree of confidence. Judge me, O Lord. Now, there are other Psalms where we've seen this as well. Psalm 139, right? It begins with, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. It ends in verses 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. But this is even significantly more bold in a sense. Judge me, O Lord. Pronounce sentence on me. What might compel a man to pray such a prayer? In what situation? Now, it's not something that, maybe it is. Maybe that's something that, to be quite honest, we ought to be able to do every day, to get down on our knees and say, Lord, you can judge me. You can pronounce sentence upon me. And obviously, we'd be interpreting that through the New Testament lens, whereby we would have confidence that judgment has fallen on Christ, and we're talking more about that search me, know me, try me thing. But if David is praying this prayer in the midst of this context as we've read it, we don't really have a great deal. We do see a contrast in this psalm, right? We see a contrast between himself and, verse 4, vain persons, dissemblers, verse 5, the congregation of evildoers, the wicked, and then verse 10 or 9, gather not my soul with sinners, my life with bloody men, verse 10, in whose hands is mischief, and their right hand is full of bribes. So we might imagine a context within which David is praying this prayer. Maybe it's when he's in the court of the Philistine kings, or when he has just interacted with Doeg, or when he's interacting with Saul, or whoever it might be, and he's seeing a contrast, and he is seeking, in a sense, for the Lord to judge him, and then specifically for this purpose, because he does not want his feet to slide. He does not want to get into a place of failure. And maybe it is that he was looking at maybe he was contemplating Saul's fall. And he's trying to distinguish, what's the difference between me and that guy? What will make the difference between success and failure? And, we come into these times in our lives. Our church is in one right now. It has been a tumultuous last year for the church. And the question that I've talked to several people about, we've gone back and forth, is, are we doing something right or doing something wrong? And that's not always necessarily an easy question to answer just on its face, right? Is everything that's happened in the church proof that we're doing something right? And so Satan's testing and attacking and God is purging? Or is this God lifting his hand of blessing because of what we're doing and moving us toward ruin? What will Legacy Baptist Church look like in 6 months, right? What David is doing here is he's contemplating the possibility of siding. Again, we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then he is advocating for, maybe even thinking through as much in his own heart as he is praying to God, the reasons why he has confidence that that he's on God's side, and so that God is on his side. And so he says, "Judge me, O Lord." He has the confidence to pray that. For he says, "I walk in mine integrity." Tom is the word here, 23 times in the Old Testament. Completeness, innocence. Vast majority of the uses of this word, though only used 25 times, are in Psalms and Proverbs, speaking primarily of the word integrity as it relates to how it is translated. It's primarily translated in our King James integrity. But it has the idea of fullness, completeness, not lacking anything, kind of that word perfection as we think about it regularly in our New Testament context. So he says that he walks in his integrity. Now let me ask you, we see that definition, Hebrew definition, completeness, innocence. I've talked about before, so you can answer how I would or how would you, how does Legacy Baptist Church, or how would you define integrity? Okay, who you are when no one's looking. Good. Any thoughts on that or additions? I like it. Now, typically speaking, when someone says who you are when no one's looking, I remind them that someone's always looking, right? But that's the point. Integrity is when you are in private the same person you are in public, right? You are not pretending. You do not present yourself as something that you aren't. If you present yourself in public, something that you are not in private, you are not living in integrity. Now, when we say that, we recognize that doesn't mean you're always going to, if I'm walking around at home in my sweatpants and a grubby T-shirt that has barbecue stains on it, and I say, well, if I don't go outside in my sweatpants and my grubby T-shirt, then I'm not a man of integrity. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about the fact that you will relax, let your hair down, whatever else in private, and then you put yourself together to go out in public. What we're talking about is that you're presenting yourself as having a fundamentally different character in public than you actually have in private. And once again, we're not always, but there's a tendency to be on our best behavior in public. Being on your best behavior or having a bad day is not an integrity issue. Those are issues dealing with other things, right? Those are issues dealing with various other elements of maybe temperance or whatever it might be. It has to do with whether or not the fundamental character that you reflect in private or that you reflect when you don't have anyone you're accountable to is the same as you reflect when you do. How you act when no one's looking is a fine way to think about it, as long as you remember that there's always someone looking. Andrea. Yeah. Yeah, so Andrea reflects integrity to the idea that if you have an opportunity to do something wrong, take something that doesn't belong to you or whatnot, and you don't take it. And once again, it does reflect the idea that when no one's looking, Would I take it when no one's looking and not was? Okay, well then that's a lack of integrity. Integrity says, if I am this person when someone's looking, I'm also that person if someone isn't. I am not going to take that thing that doesn't belong to me, regardless of who is or is not watching. I am not going to, not a whole, well, yeah, we have a reasonable number of children here tonight. I'm not going to do that thing in the house, whether or not mom and dad see. That's integrity. That means you are the person you claim to be. And David says, I have walked in mine integrity. That does not mean he's a perfect man. Integrity is not talking about how moral or immoral you are. Integrity is talking about whether or not you are a consistent person in various contexts. Anything else on integrity?
Integrity is saying what it means, and sticking to what you say.
Yeah, so not presenting a false front, right? And that will come in a little bit more. I guess it's not in this section. In the second section, David will talk about one of the things he did not do is go with the dissemblers. And that would be a reflection, the opposite of the idea of a dissembler, who is one who presents something false and presents himself in a false way. And this is exactly the opposite of this, exactly. And so whether that's in word or integrity reflects, well, truth. You are who you are. Good. So David has confidence in the Lord to say, Lord, you can judge me, not necessarily because he's a perfect man or a sinless man. None of us is, nor was David, and we know that for a ready fact. But because he says, I can stand in my integrity. I'm not pretending. Then he says, I have trusted also in the Lord. That word trusted there, to go for refuge. To place one's confidence in is the word here. I have trusted also in the Lord. So he says, judge me. I've stood in my integrity, or I've walked in my integrity, and that is the confidence that he has in his own actions and character. And then second, he says, not only can you judge me because I have walked in my integrity, but you can also judge me because I trust in who you are. In other words, God, I know how you act toward those who walk in integrity. I know how you treat those who are willing to acknowledge who they are in light of who you are. And so there's actually a dual pairing here in the psalm between the way that David acts before the Lord and the reason why he acts that way, which is because of who he knows the Lord to be. And these two together, who walks in integrity in response to the character of God, is in fact a great way to describe a man of faith. A man of faith knows who God is, believes it, knows what God has asked, believes it, and so positions himself and aligns himself with who God is and what God expects, and doesn't pretend, doesn't play games, doesn't try to pass himself off as something that he isn't before God. He aligns himself with the Lord in integrity because of who God is. And so he says, Lord, I've trusted in you and I've walked in integrity. And if I'm trusting in you and walking in integrity, then he is a man of faith. And the man of faith can stand before God and say, God, yes, go judge me. And have that confidence to do so. And he says, therefore, I will not slide. That word waver, shake, slip. It's only 6 times in the Old Testament. Certainly not a well-used word. But it speaks to that idea of becoming unstable. And this is really, I believe, the absolute focal point of the entire psalm. I believe that the whole point of the psalm is that David is reflecting upon who he is in God and who God is in him for the purpose that he can have this confidence that the Lord will keep him from falling, keep him from sliding, keep him from wavering in whatever the day is. And that wavering, as we'll see in verses 4 through 7, is particularly wavering into a place of compromise. We don't exactly know what that might be, whether that's a physical place or whether that's sin. But he says, I will be in a solid place. I will be on a strong foundation. So notice the structure here. Judge me, and then the idea is because, for, one, I have integrity, that's confidence in my integrity, and two, I trust in you, confidence in God's character. Therefore, I will not be found wanting on the day of judgment. The day that you judge me, I will not waver. I will not slip. I will not slide. The day that I stand before you, I will be in a right place. In the circumstances that befall me, in the circumstances that I stand or that I'm confronted with, I will be able to stand firm. Because of those two things, the integrity that he has and the character of the God who he's praying to. Now, verses 2 and 3 are a reiteration of the concepts from verse 1 in kind of, sort of reverse order. So once again, he says in verse 1, judge me. And then he says, because I've walked in my integrity and I can trust in you. Then he says in verse 2, examine me and prove me. And we'll get to the words in a sec, but notice the structure. Examine and prove me. So we can correlate that to judge me, right? And then he says, try my reins and my heart. And that's the further request. And then verse 3, he says, for thy loving kindness is before mine eyes. There's God's character again. And I have walked in thy truth. There's his integrity again. So this is why I say the structure is kind of, I'll get there. I've got a slide that shows it. Nope, we're on the wrong slide. Nope, we're not. Good. Okay, so let's talk about the words. Examine me is the next idea here that he asks for. Examine. And this one, to test, to prove, to investigate. 28 times in the Old Testament. Bakan is the Hebrew word there. And the call is very similar, right? So to judge is to bring this place of assessment. To examine. Here we have the word examine, and then prove, that's the word to test. So all of these are very similar words, and we're not going to necessarily, I try not in the Psalm series to get so deep into the weeds that we're running around looking at every or multiple cross-references to these words as a means by which to get a fuller idea of them. Well, it's not quite the whole point of the Psalm. If you get too into the weeds of the Psalms, then you really lose the broader idea. It would be like us picking apart songs, and that it's not the spirit of the song, right? To pick it apart in such a way. So we'll be a little bit careful with that. But he says, examine me and prove me. Test me, try me, search me. A similar idea to judge. We're looking at some parallelisms there. And then he says, try my reins and my heart. Now, the try here is actually the idea of to refine, to bring the heat upon. It's a word that's sometimes said fused together. So it has the idea of heat or the idea of trying in the fire. But in this case, it seems apparent that David is not asking God to try him as a means by which to necessarily make him better, but rather he's actually saying, put the fire to me and I think you'll find that I'm going to be okay, that I am in a place of refinement. And that seems to be the spirit here 29 times in the Old Testament that we see that word. And he says here, try my reins and my heart. So we have two organs here actually. Now the King James Bible doesn't translate these both in the organ sense. In our English, we have a few different organs of the body that we typically will use metaphorically. What are some of the English, common English, let's not get into some of the more King Jamesy stuff, we'll get there. But what are some of the common English organs that we will use, and then what do they stand for within the kind of the metaphorical elements of the human existence, if that makes sense? We have one of them here. Heart, right? If someone talks about their heart, what are they actually talking about? They're not talking about the organ beating in their chest. What are they talking about if they're talking about their heart? Yeah, center of desire, will to a degree, feelings to a degree, but really the idea of desire. The heart is the place of desire. What else do we have? Head, which is the seat of intellect or perhaps, reason, thought, right? What else? Guts, okay, so yeah, in the King James, that would be the bowels, right? His bowels yearned upon. It's kind of a strange phrase when we think about that as it relates to, David and Jonathan or whatever it is. His bowels yearned. What does that represent? The bowels or the guts.
Well, I think in the King James sense, it's almost like a deep-seated emotion.
Yeah.
Whereas in our modern vernacular, guts is probably more of a grit or determination.
Yeah. In the modern, if a guy is gutsy, right, he has determination. In the King James, it would be more the idea of like deep longing or affection, connection. Both of those reflective of kind of what happens in the gut when a person is in one of those states of either grit and determination or tremendous yearning of a sort. Now, he reigns. Now, and we'll talk about a few, we can talk about other ones, right? We can talk about eyes, right? The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. And that's talking about the discernment I guess discernment's a good word for it. We can talk about our feet, right? And the idea of feet is a person's get up and go, I guess you could say. Well, here we have the word reigns. And you'll see it very characteristically translated reigns in our King James Bible. What is a reign in this? It's not R-E-I-G-N-S, it's R-E-I-N-S. What are the reigns? Mind, okay, good. Let's keep going with that. Yep, so an element of control, right? So if the reins of a horse are how you control the horse, the reins of our mind or of our body would be the elements that control our mind or our body. And so we have this idea of reins. And the organ that is behind that word in the King James is actually the kidneys. It's actually the Hebrew word for kidney. And this would be the seat of feeling and passion. Now, the bowels have a passion element. The heart has a passion element. But with the bowels, it's like a yearning element. And with the heart, it's like a feelings element. And then with the kidneys, it is a kind of a fire, a passion. And for whatever reason, the Hebrew mind associated that with the kidneys. There are various reasons as to why it's, various people have various reasons as to why that might be. But figuratively, this is the idea of passion, or as Cassandra said, it is kind of a place of the mind. It is a place of control. It's a place of direction, which we would more associate with the mind. They associated with the kidneys, at least vernacularly. So he says, try my reins. So try my control, my directions, my passions. So he's not just saying, try my actions, but he's saying, try all the things that are motivating my actions too. And this is, again, integrity, right? Integrity is not what I'm doing exclusively. It is what directs what I'm doing. I'm not just doing what I'm supposed to do because I'm supposed to do it. I'm doing it out of integrity. I'm actually doing it intentionally and for the right reasons. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm not trying to gain over someone. I don't have ulterior motives. I'm doing what I'm doing in integrity. And so he says, examine me, prove me, and try my reins and my heart. And the idea is that if we don't want to be in that place where we will slide, where we will falter, where we will fail, we want to be people of faith. And people of faith are people of integrity and trust in the character of God. And so what we are called and compelled to ask ourselves this evening through David's confidence is, do we have that confidence too? Are we people who reflect integrity? Are we who we say we are? Or are we pretending? Are our motivations proper or improper? Why do you do the things maybe you do the things that you believe within our subculture of Christianity, or within a broader subculture of Christianity, or simply within your understanding of biblical truths. Maybe you're doing the things that you think you're supposed to do, but why are you doing them? Because it's the pairing of who God is with the alignment of my heart, the alignment of my mind, the alignment of my reins in my heart, that then bring me to a place of integrity by which I stand before the Lord in confidence. And so again, as we said, there are times where we ask, are things going right or are things going wrong? Are all these things happening to me because things are going well? Because I'm pleasing the Lord and so these things are happening? Or are these things happening to me because I'm not pleasing the Lord, right? We've asked that as a church. Well, this is a pretty good litmus test. Are we as a church standing in integrity? Have we identified the character of the Lord, responded to the character of the Lord without pretense, and aligned ourselves in integrity in your own life? Are you standing in a place where you can say, you've identified the character of the Lord, who God is, what he expects, his character, and you've identified yourself where you stand, that you're aligning, but you're not just aligning in action, but you're aligning in heart and intent. That you are aligned with him, that you are a person of integrity. And if you're trusting the Lord, and then you're responding to the character of the Lord in integrity, then you are walking in faith. And therefore you are in a place of confidence before God. Thoughts? Sandra? Mm-hmm.
I'm clean. Talks about how he loves the habitation of his house. It's almost like I am clean. I'm allowed to go in your presence because I'm clean.
No, absolutely. Just a couple verses before, I wash my hands in innocency, right? So I will compass thine altar. So the idea is I will be around your altar because my hands are washed in innocency. That could lend itself to the idea of that he has not shed innocent blood or something. Maybe he was contemplating Joab right here when Joab overextended himself and got himself into trouble. But the idea that then, yes, I have loved the habitation of thy house, the place where thine honor dwelleth. And then he says, gather not my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloody men. And so trying to create that separation between him and someone else, or him and something else, right? And so absolutely, quite possibly the case, yep. Except obviously in this case, it would not be ceremonially clean. That might be the picture, the metaphor, for him to draw to this place of spiritual cleanness. Excellent thought. Anything else? Andrea? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Andrea, what she just said is that she really likes that because David showed this tremendous desire for the presence of the Lord to be in the house. Didn't exist yet, but he's the one who went and got the tabernacle and brought it to Jerusalem, right? He is the one that craved. And so that picture of cleanness, that he might be that one, echoes of Psalm 84, 10 and 11, right? For a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. And that idea of, I was starting a new year of reading through the Bible, and so I was in Genesis 32 to 37 last couple of mornings, and one of my favorite passages in all of Genesis is Jacob wrestling with the Lord. And it's such an interesting, conflicting idea because Jacob is this guy that I just don't respect as a general rule, right? You read about him, you're like, I just don't like this guy. It's the kind of guy that I wouldn't want to hang around from what the Bible describes. But then you see this glimmer of just deep-seated passion that though he was this man who was flawed and who had all of these problems, he was the kind of guy who is wrestling with the Lord and he and his thigh is out of joint, which is his hip, right? The top of his hip, right? So it's his hip that's out of joint. And this man says, let me go. And he says, no, I will not let you go until you bless me. And for all that, Jacob falters and he deceives his father to get the blessing. There's something about the man still who, even though he used deception, he bought his brother's birthright for a mess of pottage and kind of took advantage of his brother's point of weakness to get that birthright. And then he took advantage of his father's blindness to get the blessing. Yet there's still something about a man who goes great lengths to be blessed by God. There's something about that. And David has that same sort of idea with his house, with God's house. David would go to such great lengths to be in the presence of God, to be with his God. And that kind of passion, that kind of love, and it is what drove David's integrity. Because the fact of the matter is, and we all know this, right? If I'm walking out of sync with the Spirit of God, if I'm walking in sin, then I'm not in the Spirit. And when I'm not in the Spirit and that rightness isn't there, that ought to be something that I feel, that troubles me and that compels me unto integrity. Because I want that. More than anything else, I cannot be content if I am not in the Spirit, if I am not in union with my Savior. And so it's not worth it when I look at going back to Psalm 84, right? I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. Why? I would rather be the least in the presence of God than to be out there in that place where maybe there's privileges, but it takes me away from the presence of my God. And that is that passion. It's a good thing. Anything else? Okay. So we see this idea, examine me, O Lord, prove me as equivalent to try my reins in my heart. Those are both a similar idea here, both pointing back to judge me from verse 1. And then in verse 3, we reiterate, first, David's confidence in God's character. Thy loving kindness is before mine eyes. And then second, his own integrity. I have walked in thy truths. He says, I know that you are a God of loving kindness, that you are a God who responds to those who seek you. Draw nigh unto God, he will draw nigh unto you. If you seek me, you shall find me. If you search with all your hearts. We have these New Testament concepts that draw us back to the character of the God who is of all things and above all things and through all things a loving kindness God, a God of loving kindness. And in that, David says, I stand in my integrity, I walk in your truth, because I know what that means as far as how you're going to respond to me. And I'm desperate for you to respond to me in this way, so that means I'm going to align myself in this way. That's faith. So this is the structure that I see here. And again, there's lots of other ways that initially I'd done things differently and I reorganized it all and everything a couple of times here. But what I see is this kind of A, B. A, judge me. B, I've walked in mine integrity and am trusted in the Lord. So judge me because I've walked in integrity and I trust the character of my God. Therefore, I shall not slide. And I see both elements or all three of these verses just surrounding this idea. That what David is desirous of is that he'll stand in firmness on the day of judgment as it relates to the things that he's facing in life, that he will be a man who will be stable, biblically stable. And then so we see A, B, C, and then another an A and a B. Examine me, prove me, try me, my reins and heart. And then B, for thy loving kindness is before mine eyes and I have walked. All of it thus, a chiasm all whatever kind of modified structures, chiasms tend to drive our focus to the center. And so we have the A, B, C, A, B. The A and the B are on either side are driving us toward that idea of C. I shall not slide. That's what David is truly confident in. His integrity and the Lord's character are the means by which he has the confidence that he can stand and that he is standing in the right spot. And there are those times, right, where we just don't have a whole lot else to stand on, but that we have simply obeyed. I don't understand what's coming next. I don't understand why things happened the way they happened. But the only confidence I have is this, that I have obeyed at every single possible turn I can obey. I've humbled myself every time I can humble myself. I've asked forgiveness every time I've needed to ask forgiveness. I've followed Christ in every way that I know to follow Christ. Therefore, all I can do is stand in that, believe the character of my God, believe the actions that I've taken because I trust the character of my God, and say, that means I have to stand. Not I have to stand, but I have to believe I will stand because I've done what I've been told. And the character of my God commends itself to me that if I've done that, then he'll do the rest. So that even when there are unknowns, lack of surety, there's confidence. And again, it's not actually a confidence here in himself, right? It's actually a confidence in the way he's responded to the Lord, and thus who the Lord is. Final thoughts on verses 1 through 3.
Footing is so important. And if you lose that footing, you can be taken advantage of. It can kind of be the end for you. And that would have been something that would have been very key to who David was, is he was a great warrior. And so it's interesting that he's using the idea of not sliding, that you have that firm footing. But his firm footing is not in himself, it's in his God.
Yep, absolutely. That's a really good analogy. It makes me curious. At some of the other places where we do see that word. So, as I said, this word is used 6 times, that word slide. I'll just have to read them to you because I can't pull them up. I'll probably go back to this next week. I can pull them up for you. So, 2 Samuel 22, verse 37, thou hast enlarged my steps under me, so that my feet did not slip. Job 12, verse 5, he that is ready to slip with his feet is as a lamp despised in the thought of him that is at ease. Psalm 18, verse 36, thou hast enlarged my steps under me that my feet did not slip. Psalm 26, which is what we see here. Psalm 37, 31, the law of God is in his heart, none of his steps shall slide. That's Psalm 37 is a good psalm. We'll look forward to that one sometime. And then Psalm 69, verse 23, let their eyes be darkened that they see not, and make their loins continually to shake. So that's the one time when we see that word shake, or because it's speaking of the loins rather than just the feet. Typically it's the feet. So yeah, we do have this focal point on the feet themselves not sliding out from under him, and very much so as a warrior would have been something important to him metaphorically. Good. Anything else? Verses 4 through 7 then. I do believe, in the way that I've structured this at least, that both of these are subsets, exposition of David's integrity, and then talking more about God's character. So in 4 through 7, we see integrity. I have not sat with vain persons, neither will I go in with dissemblers. I have hated the congregation of evildoers, and will not sit with the wicked. I will wash mine hands in innocency, so I will compass thine altar, O Lord, that I may publish with the voice of thanksgivings and tell of all thy wondrous works. So I believe that this is David describing the nature of his determination unto integrity. That he has not sat with vain persons. 48 times there that we see this word in the Old Testament. Evil, ruinous, useless, empty. And the characteristic of falsehood or of lies is kind of the idea there. That would be the idea of vanity. Many of these characteristics are, especially these first two, vain and dissemblers, these are actually kind of antonyms to integrity themselves. So as he talks about standing in integrity, these are he has confidence because he is not as those who are liars, who are vain, who are empty, who live in falsehood, and then dissemblers. The word is to conceal or to hide in the Hebrew. The word dissembler in our King James is one who conceals his true nature. Hypocrite is a generally good synonym for the idea there. Slightly different implications in sense. One of them is a little bit more character, the other is a bit more action perhaps. But the idea is I've not been with those people who are liars, who are vain, not in the beauty sense, but in the emptiness sense, who are vapid, or who are hypocrites. I've not gone with them. I've not invested in them. I've not followed them. I have followed truth. And that really is the contrast here. And it's all about the contrast between God, light and dark, right? He says that he's a man of integrity. That means he is a man who has rejected lies in every sense. And this is such an important characteristic for our lives. Men and women of integrity, that we be men and women who are not living lies. Lies are very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult to have a good relationship with a liar. Whether that be a liar in word or a liar in deed, whether it be a liar in what they say or just a liar in how they present themselves. And it's very difficult to have a good relationship with a liar because you can't know who they actually are, right? And David seeks for that relationship, which means he must be a man of truth. He says, I have hated the congregation of evildoers. This word hated is a little bit, it's interesting here, translated hated. It speaks more of the idea of having an enemy or having a foe. The concept is that he has rejected as an enemy one who is an evildoer. Is not necessarily speaking to the concept that everyone who is an evildoer, of course in the Old Testament, that's a valid concept, right? If you're an evildoer, you are quite literally the enemy. In our New Testament concept, we would modify our thinking a little bit on that and recognize that we are to see people as our mission field, not as our enemies when they're wicked, and to seek to call them unto the light of the Holy Spirit of God, and yet still to create that very stark separation between right and wrong. We're going to talk about that a little bit this next Sunday evening in Mark chapter 5. The idea that we, as Jude says, on some have compassion, making a difference. That word difference there is in the Greek is actually the word distinction. So we seek to set a clear above all compassionate, but it is also the means by which we advocate for the truth of God. And then he said, that's through verse 5. Any thoughts on those ideas before we keep moving here? And here, as Cassandra had mentioned, I will wash my hands in innocency. And that word there it's a fairly rare word, only 5 times in the Old Testament. It speaks of this idea of not being guilty or being innocent, but it really is the idea of cleanness in a physical sense. And so it's a word for cleanness. It wouldn't be the typical ceremonial word like for being clean or unclean. As a matter of fact, I think the only time it's used in that sense, it's used of teeth. But that's the idea, is a cleanliness or a cleanness, and of course that reflects to an innocency of heart toward ill or toward wrong. And then he says, so I will compass thine altar, O Lord, because he recognizes that those that stand in the house of the Lord are those who have clean hearts and clean hands. That I may publish with the voice of thanksgiving and tell of all thy wondrous works. And this is an interesting idea. David connects the innocency of his hands and then his ability to stand around the altar as the thing that enables him thus to publish God's wonderful works with a voice of thanksgiving. And I think there's a double meaning in this. The first is that he wants to be able to praise God in the tabernacle, right? That is the place of praise to God. And he says, I would hate to not be able to get into the tabernacle, not to be able to surround the altar of God because of how I'm acting. So I'm going to stay clean that I may do so. But then I believe there's also kind of a secondary meaning here, which is, how can I, and people do it all the time, but they do it to their own peril and particularly to the peril of their testimony. How can I not live in integrity, but then stand up and praise God? And I mean, we've all known friends and loved ones who have left the church entirely because of people who don't stand in their integrity, but stand around and praise God all day, right? With their lips, they say things, but with their works, they deny the Lord. And so David is saying here, because I am a man of cleanness, quite physically and literally, he has the right to stand in the tabernacle of God and praise him and extol his marvelous works. But also in David's mind, because he's a man of faith, he recognizes, how dare I stand up and praise the Lord and extol his marvelous works when I am not a man standing in integrity. And so I think that there's a bit of a double meaning there. Thoughts on that? Okay, we'll try to wrap it up here. Verses 8 through 12, an exposition of God's character. Lord, I have loved thy habitation of thy house and the place where thine honor dwelleth. Gather not my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloody men, in whose hands is mischief, and their right hand is full of bribes. But as for me, I will walk in mine integrity. There's that idea again. Redeem me and be merciful unto me. My foot standeth in an even place. In the congregation will I bless the Lord. Comes back to this idea of firmness, right? My feet stand in an even place. He's on firm ground. He will not slide. And then we go one verse back. Why? Because he stands in his integrity, and because the character of the Lord means that God will redeem those who stand in integrity. So we even have the entire psalm reflecting once again that structure, right? That structure of my integrity, God's character leads me to a place where I will stand firm. And then, of course, he speaks to this idea of rejecting asking God. This is not even him. This is God. Don't gather my soul with sinners. Don't gather my life with bloody men. Don't put me into the same category as them. I don't want to be that man. I want to be a man of God. And so we find this, that God will be found of those who seek him, and God will draw nigh to those who draw nigh unto him. And those are both solid New Testament concepts. And for this reason, David is confident that his feet stand in a solid place. So the psalm is for the person who's wondering or who's struggling or who's fearful that they're not standing in a solid place. And there is a biblical prescription for the person who is trying to figure out if that is the case. What is the character of your God? What has he promised? Do you believe it? Are you willing to align with it in integrity? If so, if you know and believe the character of God, what he said about himself, who he is, and you are willing to align yourself with that character and the manner in which you act in integrity, then you are exercising faith. And if you are exercising faith, if you're drawing nigh to the Lord, he will draw nigh to you. If you are seeking the Lord, he will be found of you. This is the character of the God that we serve. And if that is the case, if that is the place where I am, then I can be confident and say, Lord, judge me, examine me, prove me. I'm where I ought to be. And so I know that I won't slip. I won't slide. I know that my feet stand in an even place. Final thoughts? Sam?
Especially in verse 9, kind of thinking it in contrast with Abraham debating with God about, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Interesting here, and then we also see in the New Testament with Christ giving the parable of the wheat and tares, and no, we can't pull up the tares, and some of the wheat might come both with it, and that concept of it's kind of almost one of those fundamental character qualities of God that, and David's kind of hearkening to it here, that God won't just destroy everyone without making a way for the righteous to be preserved.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that David's touching on it here, and that it was very important to David, very important to Abraham.
Yep.
That was, this is who you are, God. We know this is who you are.
Yeah.
We see it all the way back with Noah.
Yep. Yeah, and it is one of those fundamental, foundational things that we must believe about God, right? That he will not destroy the righteous with the wicked. And the depth of desire for that to be the case, and to appeal to the Lord for that, and acknowledge that, and to see the Lord, right, whether that be in Abraham's day or Noah's day or here in David's day, is so much of a part of the foundation of our hope. Because that is what compels us to be people of integrity. Because we're not getting ahead in life by being people of integrity. Right? Now, in a Christian society, you are. But in a generalized sense, being a person of integrity is not going to put you in a place of material. But I have to believe that it puts me in a place of spiritual advantage. I have to believe that. And that is a consistent element of the character of my God. And it is a part not allow those that of integrity to slip. He will not judge the righteous with the wicked. Very good. Any other thoughts? Andrea?
Just in my mind, I'm just thinking about that. Someone that's a soldier and has had to kill people. I would just wonder how that's resonated with other people. Like that, where they're righteous, they're supposed to do this, but it's not nothing close to what I've ever done. But how he didn't want to be counted as those that were bloody, even though he was, but he was doing what he was supposed to. Like, if you killed someone, you couldn't go into the
Right. Yep. And because David had been a man of war, he couldn't build the temple, right? And so there is this idea that the lifestyle that he had did have that effect, and yet he did not lot himself in with bloody men, that being the man who probably sheds innocent blood, right? As opposed to the man who had had a life of righteous war as a general rule, but had still his reign was associated with war, and of course God wanted his house to be a house of peace. And I can only imagine that David looked forward to the peace of paradise after the life that he lived. Good. Any other thoughts?